Welcome to QI, where tonight we're having fun with flora and fauna. It's like animal, vegetable, mineral, only without the mineral. In the flower bed tonight, we have a perennial favourite, Jimmy Carr. A hardy annual John Sargent. A heavily scented late bloomer Joe Brand. And a cat having a crap in a flower pot, Alan Davis. But before we plunge into my arboretum and bestiary, let's go wild with our buzzers. John goes. Jimmy goes. Joe goes. And Alan goes. Oh, dear. Well done. Now, so let's start on our sofa-bound safari. What does my buttonhole tell you about me? Yay.
That you're a closet heterosexual.
How dare you?
I'm sorry.
It tells us that you are what you are. You are your own special creation.
It's not going to fire water at me.
It's not going to do that. It's a real flower, and it's a real member of a particular family of flowers, and it has a name.
It's a rhododendron?
It's not a rhododendron.
Camellia.
It is a camellia. Well done. It's exactly a camellia.
And you are La Dame au Camellia.
Ah, tell me about La Dame au Camellia.
It's a novel.
It's a novel.
Yeah.
And
it's about a lady.
Do you know what this meant?
Who liked camellias.
Do you know... Yeah. It's good.
Yeah, is that...
But there is a thing about the red camellia that is very extraordinary, unbelievably shocking to mid-19th century France.
Periods.
You're so right. Marguerite Gautier, the heroine of the novel La Dame aux Camélias, wore for 25 days of the month a white camellia, for 5 days a red one, to tell her lovers that she was not available, that Arsenal were playing away or were playing... Exactly. At home. The decorators were in, etc.
No, I'm not following this. Are you saying that you are available, or
I'm saying I've got a period on, John.
Oh, right.
You can't have me, I'm sorry. That's
sorry, what was this in? Was this in some play? What's
it's a novel by Alexandre Dumas Fils, the bastard son of the creator of The Three Musketeers.
Can I just say, I thought it was so sweet, because no woman in her entire life has ever said, I've got a period on.
Well, do you know...
I have to say, I've got a period or I'm on.
Oh, fair enough,
okay. Conflate them together. I've got a period on.
Anyway, it became a play. Sarah Bernhardt was in it thousands of times. It became, in 1854, Verdi saw the play and turned it into the opera for 5 points.
Is that what the opera's called? Sorry.
No. Come on.
For 5 points, it's very good.
Camellia, something flower. The flower.
The audience will know. Oh. La Traviata audience get 10 points because that's very good. Well done.
Oh, no,
it was La Traviata.
We're not in the lead again.
Yeah.
So La Traviata, which I've heard of and is a proper grown-up thing, is about a woman having a period, is it?
No. It's the story of a famous courtesan who was in love. And the real one, there were 7 men who were so passionate about her but couldn't afford her prices. They clubbed together and they also bought her a chest of drawers with 7 separate drawers in so they could keep their own clothes. And it was turned into a film as well, which was...
Snow White.
Which is called...
The 7 guys with the 1 girl is a bit...
Very good. Very good. And the film based on La Dame aux Camélias is...
Carry on menstruating.
Camille.
Camille.
Yes, in La Dame aux Camellias and La Traviata, the heroine indicates her availability by wearing different coloured camellias. The book caused an outrage and made the flower an overnight gardening sensation in Paris and beyond. Something more wholesome now. It's good news. Daddy is taking you to the flea circus. Which bit are you most looking forward to? What do you know about flea circuses?
I had fleas in their flat once.
Did you really?
Rentokil quoted 600 quid to get rid of it. I found a bloke in the local paper who did it for 40. I don't know what he sprayed.
You're not quite
Cats were going like this for a few days.
Well, do you know actually what the biggest destroyer of human fleas has been? Much bigger than pesticides.
Yes, I know the answer to that. It's vacuum cleaners.
You're absolutely right.
Yes, it's they go woof, 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 and the fleas don't like it.
I think your vacuum cleaner may be broken if it's going woof, woof, woof. I think you might want to take that one back, get a new one.
They're not specialised, these vacuum cleaners.
And they kill lots of fleas, do they?
Yeah.
But the other thing you've got to know about them is that the back legs of fleas are incredibly powerful. And if a human being had as powerful legs, they could jump over the Eiffel Tower.
You're absolutely right, because 80 times your own height is what you'd be able to jump.
These flea circuses, though, we don't have them in our time, but they were amazingly popular in the 1920s and 30s because they had to find something interesting to do between the two world wars.
Exactly. They were filling in.
And so fleas were sort of very exciting. Of course, there were a lot more of them about. I mean,
there were. In fact, they died out in the early 60s, probably. But you will see there's some film here showing you that, you're right, these strong legs allow them to pull. They were harnessed by little bits of wire.
Are they real?
Yeah. They stopped being real. No, you're thinking Michael Bentine's little mechanical ones with little automatic machines.
And you thought you could see the fleas, but there's no...
No, there really were
There's
fleas.
genuinely fleas?
Absolutely.
People trained fleas?
Well, no, they're not trained. Unfortunately, they're basically tortured. You would glue them to musical instruments and various other things and then heat the under part where they were so that their attempts to make themselves free would look as if they were playing instruments.
That's like Britain's Got Talent. That sounds horrible.
Yeah. Almost as horrible as Britain's Got Talent. You're absolutely right. But let's see some film, if we can, Mr. Man in the gallery. Here we are.
Why are they performing on his arms?
They get fed with his blood.
That's to show how small they are.
I don't think that man needs a bigger
Going to burn them
face.
with the sun. Oh, it's Ben-Hur. That's like Robot Wars.
Why have they got a serial killer operating the
They've gone comedy.
That reminds me of a very old joke. Are you ready for a very old joke?
I'd love to hear a very old joke.
Here is a very old joke. How do you build a flea circus?
Oh, yeah.
You have to start from scratch.
Hey! Excellent.
Was that stuck into the flea, or is it glued on?
It's glued, or they make little wire harnesses for them. And, as I say, people like Michael Bentine then did these mechanical ones. He did one in a Royal Variety performance in the 60s. And that's when I first saw it, and I realised there were no fleas. And like you, I thought there was no such thing and that it was just a sort of joke.
But it was also part of that idea that you'd have freak shows, wouldn't you? You'd have all sorts of daft things.
It's awful to raise this. You two aren't related, are you?
Are you suggesting we're some kind of freak show?
No, I just said
that should be next to the flea circus,
There is
Joe.
Yeah.
There's not a... Well, there's a bit of a likeness. We're brother and sister.
No, that explains it. No. Flea circuses covered a range of acts, including chariot races and fencing matches, as well as acrobatics. And techniques included gluing the fleas to musical instruments and then heating the floor so they appeared to be playing the instruments as they struggled to escape. Now, what is the really odd thing about the only fish in the world that lives in a tree?
Is it going to be an underwater tree thing? Like those little fish that can live in anemones because they're the only ones that aren't poisoned by them, that sort of thing?
Actually, these are trees above the surface. They
Stephen, is that meant to
No,
be
that's ridiculous.
a perfect picture of... Because I'll tell you one otherwise, I know that's a salmon for a start. It does not like to live in a tree, I know that.
No, we can actually show you the real fish in the tree. There we are in the mangrove swamps of Belize and Florida.
Where is it? I can't see it.
Florida, well, you can't see it yet, but this is its natural habitat. And, of course, these pools shrink, and it goes up these little grooves made by insects. It goes up, whole groups of them go up into the tree. And we can actually see one poking its little eye out there in a tree, and it will live there, but...
And what's the unusual thing? It can...
Unusual...
Can it whistle one tune while it hums another?
Kind of almost an erotic version of that. It is the only vertebrate that is hermaphrodite that self-fertilises. That's actually how it breeds. It pleasures itself and makes itself
Why
pregnant.
don't we all do that? In terms of Darwinian natural selection, why don't we all do that? Because that would be tremendous fun. My teenage years...
It would be fun, yeah. You're right.
There would have been hundreds and thousands.
It'd be quite good fun as well to tell yourself
the
you've got
reason.
a headache, wouldn't it? No, I'm sorry, I
Given a
can't
name,
tonight.
isn't it called asexual reproduction?
No, well, it's actually hermaphroditic. It's not like parthenogenesis you may be thinking of.
Oh, right.
Which
I
is...
I was.
Come on.
Yeah, that's right. I was struggling towards that. But
You
now
might have been.
He's new.
Yeah. It's called a killifish. And there are actually 1,270 different species of killifish.
That's not the same one that we've just seen.
That is not. That's probably a
That's his
different
sister.
species or a different age of one, but it's certainly a killifish. Now, while we're at the water's edge, why does a flamingo stand on one leg? Yes.
I think I've got the answer. Because it wants to go to sleep.
Yes.
Is it?
You're right.
Ah,
That's absolutely
well.
right.
I was going to say landmines.
You're absolutely right.
Are they pink because they're on their period, but it's not very heavy flow?
Oh, dear. No, you're right, though. What happens is they have, like other animals, the ability for half of themselves to go to sleep at one time. So the half with the leg up is asleep. That whole half of their body is in a torpid state and the blood flow is less and that leg couldn't sustain them while asleep. When that has had enough sleep, they then swap over and that leg comes down.
There
The
must
other
be a
one goes
terrible
up.
in-between moment when they just fall on their arse.
You wonder about that, don't you? Yes, the other theory...
How does that work then? Does it go laterally kind of down the middle of their face and their neck, or does their arse go to sleep and then their face wake up?
One assumes it's sort of down the middle with it.
So the phrase "my leg's gone to sleep," that's a whole new thing.
Precisely. Their leg literally has gone to sleep. And they are pink because...
It's wait a moment, not crayfish, prawns or something.
Oh, it's not prawns, no. No, it is a commonly held fallacy that they're pink because they eat pink food like prawns or shrimps, but actually...
Or Angel Delight.
Or Angel Delight. No, they eat a blue-green algae, which, oddly enough, is full of this carotenoid that makes them pink. And so in zoos, they give them supplements to make them pink, which...
I tell you, the flamingo version of Where is Wally's really difficult.
Yes, isn't it? They are interesting creatures. They can drink boiling water because they...
How did they find that out?
because
A very cruel man found that out. Here you go.
they live near geysers where the water is at that temperature.
They can
quite
eat
happily.
a McDonald's apple pie.
The only species that can. Very good.
Species that can do that.
Yeah, which is the hottest substance known to man. Isn't
Yeah.
it? Absolutely.
Developed by NASA.
Yeah. So there you are. That's your flamingo. I think we've sucked all the nutrient out of the flamingo. Now, what kind of tricks could you play on a naive rhinoceros?
Ooh.
Yeah.
You could tell it's a unicorn that just needs to moisturise. You could tell it that you were the wife of a Nigerian ambassador, and that if it sent you $4,000, it'd probably go for it, wouldn't it?
I think it might.
So this is a naive rhino as well, as opposed to, sometimes you get a rhino that's quite worldly wise.
Yeah. No, it's the zoological or natural history meaning of the word naive. It has a special meaning when applied to animals. Do you know what that is?
Naive animal.
Yeah.
He's a bit... Does
Does it mean very old?
Going on with
No, it's to do with an animal that is suddenly put into a terrain or an ecosphere, if you like, which its evolution has not prepared it for.
Like a rhinoceros going to Peckham.
Exactly. Or the other thing can happen that into, for example, the classic example is an island, a new species arrives that can cause absolute havoc. Something like a dodo, for example, or all kinds of birds and animals in Bermuda and various islands that had literally evolved with no sense of fear whatsoever. Because a sense of fear, it uses up energy because you're constantly running and looking and being nervous. And if you live in an island where all the species are friendly, or none of them at least wants to eat you, you completely, over the thousands of years, lose any sense of fear. And so when people first arrived on Bermuda, for example, there were all these birds that would just wander into their hands. You could pick them up and put them in a cooking pot. And the other birds would cluster around quite happily. The point is you can play almost any kind of trick on a naive rhinoceros. The term is applied to animals that meet threats that their environment hasn't prepared them for, such as when a new predator is introduced to an island. Now, as night falls on our expedition, the evening chorus starts up from the waterhole. It's spring and love is in the air. What are these toads saying to each other?
Very repetitive.
Yeah. These are natterjacks. And natterjacks, like a lot of toads, have explosive sexual engagements, if you like, when
Not just
suddenly it's ready, and the male toad will jump on absolutely anything, animal, vegetable or mineral, but hopefully a female toad, but very often it will jump on a male toad and start humping away, which is fine.
Yeah.
But the male toad underneath often doesn't like it, and...
Well, you know, reach around.
And it makes a noise, and that is the noise you hear during the mating season.
There was a boy at my school who used to catch frogs and skin them and let them go.
Oh.
Well, yeah, he let them go. Look on the positive side. Why have you always got to focus on the negatives? Yeah. He was a humanitarian.
He said, it's amazing, you could see all their insides.
Just one word comes to my head, Essex. I don't know why.
He says it was a school, it was a Borstal.
Yeah. That is
Well,
cruel.
he said he did that anyway. So you have to leave a little bit around their eyes.
Oh.
Yeah, you don't want to be cruel. So you're saying that the sound that we heard there was a lot of frogs
Don't
going...
bugger me, I'm a bloke.
So I just can't understand the idea that this toad would have evolved and it would have gone, well, OK, when the mating season comes round, just go for your life. Rather than trying to chat a girl up.
It seems extraordinary. Do you know the difference between a frog and a toad?
Spelling. Read.
Very good. You know, you might as well be right. There's no definitive difference, to be honest. Generally speaking, toads have drier skin and they have drier lives, but essentially there is no real difference.
My dog once, I used to have an Alsatian, and she came to wake me up one morning, which was unusual. Normally she'd wait for me to wake up. She came and she put her head under the duvet and pulled it off me like that. And I said, what are you doing? And she went to the bedroom door and looked at me. Did that. And then I got up and went, and she went to the kitchen door, still looking at me, and led me to a water bowl, which is by the back door, and she's looking at it and looking at me. And I looked at it, and there was a frog in it.
That's so sweet.
And it must have come in the back door like the night before, and then just found itself in the kitchen. And then it got in the water bowl and sat there all night with its eyes. This huge dog's head. And he said, I'm going to go and get Alan. This is...
The thing I love about that is the idea of the relationship of you and your dog being on quite a level...
Yeah.
Come and have a look at this, Alan.
We shared a flat. The thing was, I had a walled garden. I don't know how the frogs got in the garden, but they did at the same time every year.
The odd thing you're saying about this, every time this enormous quantity of toads are killed every year on the roads, about 20 tonnes of toad lose their lives. We're trying to make it less with toad tunnels. Do you know the reason that there's so many die on the road?
They all cross at the same time. It's mating season.
Yeah, they have ancient mating ponds that they have had for, it seems, hundreds and hundreds of years, and whether there's a road there or not, that's the way they've always gone.
It used to happen in Buckhurst Hill, in a pond in Buckhurst Hill near the high road, and people would go out with frying pans.
Yeah, and help them
hop
across.
Into a frying pan, and then you just flip them. Because there are scores of them.
It combines fun with doing good. Yeah. You couldn't ask for better.
If that's on another toad, then it's all done.
Did you hear a very extraordinary story in Hamburg in 2005 about the exploding toads?
Vaguely, yes.
What happened was, toads started exploding during the mating season. More than 1,000 toads, swollen to 3 times their usual size, crawled out of the water, making eerie screeching noises, and blew up, propelling their entrails up to a yard away. People immediately thought, well, it might be a virus or industrial pollution, but it turned out, do you know what it was the cause?
Al-Qaeda.
No.
Suicide toads.
It wasn't.
Suicide toads. They were all fundamentalists and
They'd go into a busy marketplace and splatter everyone with toad entrail. That'll learn you. Toad rights.
It was crows. Crows had discovered how to fly in and, in one swift, efficient movement, remove the liver of the toads. They'd just go straight in and pull out the liver.
Are these ninja crows?
Yeah.
What on earth are you talking about? They come in, they've got their little scalpel ready.
No, they use their beak.
And just, in through the mouth?
The birds had worked out how to do that. With a single strike through the chest, they could remove the liver. The toad's defence mechanism did the rest. They puffed themselves up to intimidate their foe, forcing their intestines out of the hole that had been made under high pressure in a kind of fatal hernia.
Well, that's extraordinary. Oh, of course, the other thing about toads is it sometimes does rain toads, doesn't it? That does happen.
It rained fish once in Knighton in Wales. Do you know that? Because what happened was there was like a mini tornado and it just picked a load of fish up out of the river and blew them along and
That's
then
what I
rained
heard.
on the town. So that can happen.
Do you know that joke about a librarian who sees this hen come into the library and the hen comes up and says, book? And
It's definitely a hen.
the librarian gives a book and tucks the book under her arm. And the next day the hen comes in and goes, book, book, book. And the librarian gives her 3 books, puts them under her arm, gets away. The next day goes in, book, 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 book. So 5 books. The librarian thinks, this is weird. I've never, ever known of a hen that's this fast at reading. And it's just extraordinary. I've got to find out what's going on. So she grabs her Macintosh and follows the hen out of the library into a house. And so she looks in through the keyhole, and there's the hen sitting on a bed, and there's a frog in the bed with a little thermometer in its mouth and a flannel over it, obviously not very well. And the hen is tending it and offers a book, and each time the frog goes, read it, read it, read it. Anyway, silly joke, but...
I know, so what's this?
Yeah.
That's a seagull.
Yeah.
And what's this? That's a seagull coming back from the library.
Very good.
Want to hear my library joke?
Go on.
Man walks into a library,
Yeah.
says, fish and chips, please. The librarian says, this is a library. He says, sorry, fish and chips, please.
Excellent. But the reason I mention my particular joke is that actually there's something very odd about this perception we have that frogs go reddit, or ribbit. And do you know why it is that all around the world people sort of do jokes or imagine that frogs make this noise? Because there's only one species of frog that actually makes that noise. Do you know where it is?
Is it in Hollywood, California?
Yes, it's the Pacific tree frog. And when sound came to movies and they wanted to start doing soundtracks to everything from Sanders of the River to Tarzan movies and anything that basically was an outside track, they sent their sound recorders out to record frogs, amongst other things, for their archives for sound. And all the frogs, all the way down the coast of the Pacific, sound like ribbit. And they don't in Africa, they don't in Europe, they don't in Central America, they don't in Asia. And so in all American films for about 30 or 40 years, when you would hear this ribbit noise, and it became the sound of a frog. But it just happens to be, as you rightly said, 5 points Jimmy Carr in Hollywood, California. Anyway. The most common sound of a toad is get off, because it's the high-pitched croak of protest it makes when a male accidentally mounts it. Now, what's the worst that can happen in the middle of a fairy ring?
Well, I'm not taking the bait. You know what, there's a time and a place for this sort of thing, and it is 10:30 Graham Norton show.
Well, thank you for not saying sand in the Vaseline or something obvious like that.
Oh no, I'll get to that. Don't
All
panic.
right.
I'll talk over it.
Yeah.
It's going to be some sort of flora or fauna,
Yeah.
I'll wager.
Oddly enough, it's neither. If it isn't flora, no, but it is a living thing.
It's a living thing.
And if it's a living thing and it's not flora or fauna,
Leprechaun.
fungus. It's fungus.
They're magic, aren't they, fairy rings?
Fairy rings are
got
said to
there
be
by
magic
next year.
things.
By
in
simple
which
people.
They are, exactly, because fungus grows in these, or can grow in these circles. And when the mushrooms shrink back, you get discoloured grass in a ring as well. And you see it in some of them, the one in France, up to 700 years old.
What's the thing that happens then?
Well, there are myths and legends about it. For example, Joe Brand, if you're a young lady...
Well, I don't know why you look at me.
I was trying to be gallant.
It doesn't suit you.
Fair enough. All right, then imagine a young lady, Joe
I'll
Brand.
try.
Yeah, and apparently if she goes into a fairy ring on May Day morning and washes her face with the dew from the grass inside, she will turn into a hag.
So are you saying, obviously, I've done that?
I'm saying whatever you do, don't do that. It would be a
Don't
terrible
go into
thing.
a fairy ring.
Don't do that again.
Oh, no! You see, that's mean.
There are worse things that can happen to a fair young maiden these days, at the swings with half a bottle of cider.
Yeah. Anyway, supposedly you might turn into a crone or get stuck in a time vortex, all kinds of superstitions. Actually, fairy rings aren't caused by dancing fairies, they are a fungus. Now, what use is a frog after a one-night stand? Yep.
I think I've got the answer. I'm getting the spirit of this show.
Yeah.
It's about sex, isn't it?
It kind of is. I did say after a one-night stand.
Is there some sort of natural morning after pill effect?
No, not that. For 30 years, between 1930 and 1960, this was used by Western science in an absolutely serious way to perform a very important function.
Do they turn a different colour or something if a woman's pregnant?
It's not exactly that, but that is precisely the use they were put to as pregnancy tests.
Not really?
Yeah.
They're pregnancy tests?
They were pregnancy tests.
A woman pees on that?
No. No, a woman's urine is injected into it.
How?
With a needle. How
No,
else?
OK.
No wonder he looks so pissed.
That's an African bullfrog, I think, but actually they use the clawed toad as much, or very...
So hang on, that frog there has just had another frog on his back trying to bum him, and then suddenly there's a woman's pee being injected into him. He's having a horrible day.
Well, the point is that it's a female clawed frog. If the woman was pregnant, the female frog, within 8 to 12 hours, would ovulate. It's as simple as that.
I wonder if they have like a little blue line on their back, so you look at
A
it
little
like
plus. A plus or a minus, but it was a standard pregnancy
The
test.
best way to test if a woman is pregnant is just leave it 9 months, see if it gets a flat.
See if
Yeah, that's a good test.
If it gets a house, it's twins.
There was a terrible outcome of having these African frogs around the place. The National Health Service in Britain kept a lot of them, and some of them escaped, and unfortunately they had a disease.
They were full of piss.
It was called chytridiomycosis, and it is threatening a third of all the world's amphibians now. It's spread around the world. It's actually a deep tragedy, and these frogs have caused part of it. So our Western desire to know whether we're pregnant before the 9 months has caused huge damage to lots of amphibians. So there we are. African clawed frogs ovulate if injected with the urine from a pregnant woman. And until the 1950s, this was the only available pregnancy test. From frogs to hogs, why should we feel particularly sorry for the pygmy hog-sucking louse? Yay.
I think we've got to worry about this because the louse goes onto the hog, right?
Yeah.
But the hogs are very small and they're not very interesting, and they're dying out. Is that the answer?
Absolutely right, John Sargent, yes. It's an easily forgotten fact that when a species that we care about, as humans, we tend to care about big woolly species. When they become endangered, we forget that there are many other species that are dependent on them, and such an example is the pygmy hog, of which there are only about 150 left in the world. And there is a whole species of louse which is only able to live
I
on
can't
this
believe
animal.
it's able to sustain that louse, because they're about the same size.
It's,
You get a couple of those on your back, no wonder they're dying out.
we have lice, of course, human lice. We have
Well,
head
Stephen, we
lice.
didn't want to discuss that in front of other people. Yeah, we'll go and see a specialist.
And they're quite interesting. They tell us a lot about ourselves. For example, the body louse only lives in human clothing, and we know that it's only 70,000 years old as a subspecies of louse. And that sort of tells us that humans started to wear clothing 70,000 years ago.
And we didn't mention this about our fleas, did we? You know when we talk about fleas and all that stuff, the flea circus? Well, they only used human fleas.
Oh, did
and
they?
the human fleas are now dying out, maybe extinct.
Because of?
Because of vacuum cleaning and all that stuff.
Going woof woof, yeah.
But it's... isn't there, that is odd, isn't it?
You're absolutely right.
It is a bizarre thing, though, where we care a lot more about the little fluffy things than the horrible, that beastie-looking thing.
Yeah.
Because isn't there the thing about the panda? The panda is the emblem of the World Wildlife Fund, so a massively disproportionate amount of money goes towards saving the panda because it looks like a battered wife.
Right. Yeah. The pygmy hog-sucking louse is the only species of louse classified as critically endangered. It's co-endangered with the dwindling pygmy hog population of northern India. Now, whilst the pygmy hog-sucking louse is in decline, it's up and away for ferrets. So tell me, how does a ferret build an airliner? Yes.
Really weaselly.
Oh! Oh, no! I'm sorry. We got that before you. Oh, dear.
If it's any consolation, I was seconds behind.
Boeing used them.
What? Sorry?
Boeing used ferrets
To build a plane?
to help build the plane, not to build the whole plane, obviously.
They don't put that in the ads, do they?
No. But they're not ashamed of it. And actually, they were used for the wedding of Charles and Diana, for the Millennium Party in the Park, for various...
For looking for things?
No.
Their fur?
No.
Is it, you want to get something down a very long tunnel, you tie it tight to the...
Brilliant. Yeah, absolutely. That's precisely what it is, Alan. You use it for wiring. It happily goes through the narrowest of spaces, and it's encouraged, it comes out the other end, and you've got the wire through the space. It was used by Boeing right up until the 1960s, and...
It's a brilliant idea.
Isn't it? It's very clever. Anyway, they are now the third most popular pet in America after cats and dogs. They welcome you when you come back from a day's work, like puppies. They're very like puppies.
Come
they go up
in,
your
come
trousers?
in.
Yeah, they're thrilled to see you. They're very pleased to see you.
Do they run up your trousers, though?
Well, the trouser business is interesting. I mean, there are people who claim that this is a Yorkshire sport of having ferrets in your trousers, but no one's quite sure whether it really is. It's become one, but it kind of started as a hoax in a famous interview that some old...
It was always in sitcoms in the 70s.
Exactly.
Someone with a ferret.
It's a ferret up your trousers, that's right. They're used now for pet therapy because they are very pleasing, friendly animals.
You mean they sit opposite you on a chair and...
Talk you through your problems.
And how does that make you feel?
And interacting with them apparently reduces your stress hormones. It's helpful for the elderly, the depressed, and children recovering from severe illnesses, and they're used for that. So, get a ferret. And so, once more, we plunge ferret-like into the black hole of general ignorance. Fingers on buzzers, if you would. What's the fastest thing in the natural world? Alan.
Blue whale.
Every time! Every time. It's never going to be blue whale, is it? It's never going to be blue whale. Any other thoughts?
The fastest
thing in the natural world, yeah?
Cheetah.
No!
Oh, I know. Comment.
In the natural... It's going to be alive.
Is it something like a cheetah, but that's not?
No, it's not an animal. It's a flower.
So you're on a road and suddenly it overtakes you?
No.
Blimey.
We're talking ejaculation. We're talking, again, sex.
It's a sex obsession.
What do they do?
Sorry, the fastest thing on Earth. Is this a personal slight at me? Because I'd had a very busy week.
No, it's not. It's not that. It's a flower called the white mulberry. And it pushes out its pollen at half the speed of sound, Mach 0.5, which is over 350 miles per hour.
Gosh.
It's the fastest thing in biology. Nothing moves faster.
But what about an aircraft? Oh, yeah.
In biology.
Well, what about a naturally reared organic aircraft? Yes.
Yeah,
Anyway,
made out of ferret.
It's the Morus alba. And what do I have on me that owes itself to?
Your flower, surely.
No, something owes itself to the white mulberry that I'm
Is it a
wearing.
silk tie?
Oh, silk.
Silk, of course, yeah. So there are thousands of them in China in particular, of course, where much silk is. The silkworm lives on the white mulberry leaves. But it pollinates, it pushes out its pollen at this astounding speed. Stored elastic energy in its stamens.
Wow. So if you've got hay fever, you've got no chance of escaping it.
You really haven't.
It's coming out quite
Your
a
eye
pace.
out.
Yeah.
Yeah. No wonder it's itchy. Wow.
So there you have it. What is... What's that noise? I don't know. Just
Nice.
Just growling.
Bloody good.
I want it as a ringtone.
Fingers back on... So there you have it. You move on then, so fingers on buttons. What do you call a slug with a shell?
I'm not falling for that one.
I'll take the bullet.
Yeah.
Snail?
Oh!
Just for a moment, I thought you were going to say, yes, you do, and then carry on.
No,
So you asked, what do I call?
yeah. No, you can't get out of it that way, I'm afraid. No, a snail with a shell is a snail. A slug with a shell is a slug. Some slugs have shells, and they are slugs, not snails. They have vestigial snails, small snails, it's sort of vitrified snails like the glass slug. And slugs we think of as being sort of shellless snails, but they can have little things on them. They eat each other's slime as an act of foreplay. And then afterwards...
So do I.
Yeah. Carry on with this. Does the female then bite off your penis?
Huh? Well, a nibble's not going to hurt you.
We can but hope.
They're obviously terrible garden pests, but they are, after insects, the
Used
most...
to live in our kitchen when we were students. And there'd just be trails across the floor in the morning. We didn't do anything about it.
No, it just had bits of cornflakes stuck
Carry
into
on.
it.
Yeah.
There are 37,000 species of gastropod. After insects, they're the most common class of animal on the Earth.
37,000. Okay, write that down.
Yep, if you would. I'll be testing you next week. Yeah. How do peacocks impress the ladies?
Again. This traps...
Yeah?
By doing the thing. By doing the... No, that's not
So
what we
what? I don't know what you're saying.
Should I say to the female peacock, how do you like your eggs in the morning? Protected from foxes.
It's good that you've avoided our trap, because you're right. You'd think it was fanning. I mean, there they are. Look at that. That's an astonishing sight. That's real. That's not made up. But some Japanese scientists at the University of Tokyo have discovered, much to everybody's surprise after a long study, that peahens seem to select peacocks according to other criteria. There seems to be...
Sense of humour.
Yeah, exactly. That's it. That's what it is.
Personality, yeah.
They're not. It's personality and sense of humour. It's not colour and drama.
Were they filling in a questionnaire? Because often I find they say that, but when it comes down to it,
You think it
they've
may
got
be
a much
that.
bigger, sort of hunkier guy.
They took 7 years to do this, and they observed 258 matings. It seems a very surprising result, but they've been wasting their time growing these tails, if we're to believe these Japanese people.
So what did they do? They took their tails off. How did they experiment?
I don't know how the experiment was done. They judged tail quality in two ways. First, by simply measuring tail length, and secondly, by taking photos of each male during the tail fanning display ritual, counting the number of eye spots. Next, they examined whether females chose mates with the best quality tails, according to those criteria. But that may not be the peahen's criterion, of course, exactly.
I think it's dodgy research.
I sort of agree with you, John.
I think what we've got to do is to do the whole thing all over again and dress them in raincoats.
That would do it. Anyway, what happened after Captain Cook shot an albatross?
That is important.
So this fella shot that fella. I can see why. He's looking right at him.
That's Captain Cook, supposedly. Looks rather like Roy Dotrice, the actor, there for some reason, but it's Captain Cook. And the answer is they ate it. Joseph Banks, the great botanist, after whom Botany Bay, of course, is named. He sailed with them, and he describes in his diary, he said everybody commended them, the albatross steaks, and ate heartily of them, though there was fresh pork upon the table. So this idea that it was bad luck to eat albatross seems to have come after Captain Cook. In fact, it probably came from the poem, The Ancient Mariner, the Coleridge poem, with which you're all familiar, of course. What do we know about... Of course you know it. Come on. What do you know about albatrosses generally, though? Anything interesting about them?
Yeah, they get caught up in fishing lines all the time.
They do. They're all under threat,
Everyone gets very upset about it.
because they're rather extraordinary birds.
And they fly thousands of miles.
The young wandering albatross will set off and will be in the air for 10 years before it lands again.
That one's looking at me.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? It's looking at the camera, shall we say.
Yeah, it feels like it's looking right at me.
But isn't that amazing? 10 years without landing. I mean, they're absolutely
Why does it
astounding.
land after 10 years? 'Cause it must feel like a bit of a fall. It must go, I think I could go 11.
Mating and the eggs can't be laid and hatched and incubated with its
You
mate.
couldn't lay the eggs on the move?
No, darling.
So do they fly into the water to get food? Or
They dive in and get fish, yeah.
get other airborne food that they might pass by?
No, it's fish. They don't. But they don't actually land, as I say. And they can go for 6 days without flapping their wings. They can glide for that long. They preserve their energy amazingly.
And they're on thermals, aren't
Yeah,
they?
well, actually, they're not like the
They weren't
higher birds.
thermals?
No, they're lower. They actually take the wind off the surface of the water.
Try and listen to the headmaster.
And finally, before we stagger back to civilization, is a mushroom an animal or a plant?
Plant. Or an animal.
It's not either, it's a fungus.
Which is it closer to? That makes any sense.
An animal
It
or a
does.
plant,
Yeah.
you mean?
Yeah.
Well, there, it's closer to a plant.
Hey, very good.
Right next to that glass.
You'd think it was a plant, so I'll say animal.
Yeah, correct. Absolutely right. It recently was discovered that it has more in common with animals than it does with plants.
Yeah.
Now, it's time to have our guests gas-stuffed and mounted in glass cases as we come to the scores. Taking the laurels of victory this week is the audience with class 10! You see? How about that? Well done, audience. You see, it pays to know about opera. Just that Traviata, and there you are, they win. But in a creditable second place with -1, Jimmy Carr! And in third place with an excellent score for a beginner, -4, John Sargent. And in his usual fourth place, but oddly not last, with -18, Alan Davis. And in this F-Series, finally and fifthly, it's the filthily fabulous Joe Brown with -27. That's all from this florid and formal edition of QI. It's good night from Joe, John, Jimmy, Alan, and from me. And I leave you with this floral tribute from Richard Brinsley Sheridan, a great pick-up line. Won't you come into the garden? I would like my roses to see you. Good night.
Last night, U2 recorded a special gig on the roof of Broadcasting House exclusively for the BBC. Watch it by pressing the red button now. Margaret Thatcher's 10 years struggle into politics. Long Walk to Finchley is next on BBC Two.